Hey, this is Sanyam Bhutani, and you're listening to Chai Time Data Science, a podcast for data science enthusiasts where I interview practitioners, researchers, and Kagglers about their journey, experience, and talk all things about data science. Welcome to another episode in the Chai Time Data Science Show. In this episode, I'm joined by Ryan Chesler, Kaggle Competition Master, currently ranked in the top 400 in the competitions tier on the platform. Ryan is working as a machine learning engineer at Site 1001. He has a background in business with a degree from Arizona State University. In this episode, we talk about Ryan's journey into Kaggle and discuss the solution to his recent finish on the Jigsaw Unintended Bias in Toxicity classification Kaggle competition, where his team finished 12th, bagging his second gold medal, bringing the second gold medal to his profile. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, I am today talking to a very special Kagler who's just bagged his second gold medal on a competition. Hello Ryan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I've seen you've had lots of really accomplished people on, so it's cool to be among those.
I'm really a fan of your write-up, the personal side of things. I'll make sure it's linked in the description of the podcast. I know you decided to take an all-in strategy. You had invested quite a bit of time in your business. You decided to settle it down and go all into data science. Could you tell us what got you interested in data science at first?
Yeah. It really was just looking at YouTube videos and seeing all of the interesting things that people were doing. I saw people playing video games with AI and all of these other things, and then I saw that I could apply some of these techniques to the business I was currently running, and I was seeing that. I figured that some people must be using AI in what I was doing, where I was basically trying to find deals off of eBay and Craigslist and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Because I would list something and then immediately I would get 6 offers from a bunch of different people. And I was like, there's no possible way that you have a human doing this so quickly. So, how are you doing that? And so I, I had already gone through some of the Coursera courses, and I was like, this is an opportunity for me to actually apply that knowledge that I found. And so I built a very rudimentary app that was just basically looking at listings and sending an email to me if it thought it was a good deal. And so I spent a bunch of time labeling data and figuring all of that. And at the time, it was just completely awful because I didn't know about pandas. I didn't know I was an awful programmer and all of this stuff, but that was my first dip into it. And I just saw the value immediately.
So this was one of your first coding projects, so to speak?
Pretty much, yeah. I had done Code Academy and a couple other things like that, but I had never actually said like I'm going to sit down and I'm going to build something. So that was my first time actually
Got it.
making something useful rather than just a coding puzzle.
Mhm. And where did Kaggle come into the picture? So, what led you to first signing up for Kaggle and getting into the first competition?
That was kind of necessity. I had decided that I wanted to do data science and machine learning instead of the business that I was running because that was slowly tapering out and failing. And so I
Mhm.
was trying to figure out what do I want to do
Yeah.
with the rest of my time now. And I tried applying a bunch of different places. I applied probably 50 different places, never got any responses back.
Mhm.
And I figured going through a whole degree program was going to take too long. I had already done 5 Coursera courses, so I felt like I had sort of the pedigree, but I didn't have anything to back up that I actually knew this stuff. And so Kaggle for me was just a proving ground. It was the way that I could show I'm actually decent at this and I can do it even better than a lot of people.
Got it. And how was the first competition experience for you? Because sometimes it's not so good for everyone, usually.
Well, mine, I actually, the first one I did was the Mercari price suggestion one.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that one honestly wasn't going very well when I first started because I was applying these techniques that I had just learned, and I thought I was going to just come in and be able to do reasonably well, but it knocked me down a peg when I um, couldn't just could not get my score any higher. And I saw these people, my score was like 0.43, and other people were down at 0.39 something, and I just had no idea how they were possibly getting scores that low. And that was
Right.
when I actually went to um, my first meetup because I was like, I'm putting in so much time into this competition, and I can't. I've just hit a
Mm-hmm.
roadblock. I need to get external help. And so that was
Right.
when I went to a meetup and I met my teammate Alex, and he said, "I'm already working on this jigsaw competition. Let's just both work on that." And so I just ditched the Mercari one and I focused
Got it.
full time on the jigsaw one.
So, sort of like your first fully invested Kaggle competition is where you got your gold medal.
Yeah, yeah. I was pretty invested in the Mercari one, but the Jigsaw one was the one that I ended up finishing out on. So yeah,
Got
it
it.
was kind of my first, but not really.
Mhm. Okay. And you're currently working as a machine learning engineer at Site 1001. Could you tell us more about the projects that you're working on?
Yeah, they're not as heavy machine learning as one would expect. Where Site 1001 does smart building related stuff, and so
Okay.
one of the issues with buildings just in general is that um, there's a lot of basic things that people just don't even know about their building. So just
Mm-hmm.
taking inventory and knowing how many light bulbs you have in a certain building
Right.
is kind of a non-trivial thing to do because a lot of those things exist just in blueprints. There's no digital format. And a lot of buildings are 30 years old, so they just don't even exist at that point. And so what
Right.
my contribution has been is figuring out ways that we can automate the extraction of that information out of the blueprints. And so just like I was using the light bulb example before,
Mm-hmm.
just applying simple, not even machine learning techniques necessarily, but to the main system that I've been working on, we call it Asset ID, is basically
Okay.
finding duplicates of things that are within the documents. So someone can draw a bounding box around one specific lighting fixture, and then it will look through the rest of the document and find all of the rest of them and say, okay, there's 275 of this specific lighting fixture. And then you can
Got
build out a whole profile of what's even in the building, which
it.
seems
Right.
like a trivial thing, but with current technology, it's actually not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And in one of your posts, I think the story behind the goal, you mentioned you work full time now remotely. So could you tell us like how does Kaggle blend along with your full time job? Because Kaggle in itself is a full time job.
Yeah, it's just a lot of lost sleep. Um, it when I was running my other business, I just got kind of used to having an off schedule because I had
Mhm.
when I was running the other business, I had started doing some work to build out my own website and a couple other things. But at the time, I had so little money that I was contracting it out to people on Fiverr and Upwork and various other sites, and they were typically people in other time zones. And so
Okay.
I got pretty used to staying up very late at night in order to work with people internationally and
Right.
making sure everything was going correct. So it's not much of a departure for me. Just do my normal daily work and then have dinner or
Mhm.
something, and then go back to Kaggle and whatever else I'm working on.
9 to 5 for your job and then 5 to 9 for Kaggle,
Yeah.
sometime in between. Got
Yeah.
it. And also, I think like right now your teammates are in the same time zone, right? So the teammates, at least for the recent competition, were in the same time zone for you.
Yeah. Yeah. For this competition, I was just working with Jeff, who's actually one of the guys from the local meetup.
Mhm. Okay. Uh, and congratulations on your second gold on the Jigsaw competition. For the audience, I'd like to mention that Ryan's team was placed 12th on the final leaderboard, and now he's just 3 gold medals away from being a grandmaster. So,
Yeah. It 3 doesn't sound like very much, but that's actually really hard to do. So I don't know when that'll come, but hopefully in the near future.
all right, I'd really love to know more about your solution, but before to set the stage, could you tell us about the challenge in the Jigsaw Unintended Bias and Toxicity classification challenge? What was that about?
Yeah, so that was actually pretty similar to the first competition that
Hmm.
Alex and I and Boyan and Andre competed in. So the gist of the competition is you're given some text and you're trying to determine, is it toxic or not? Is it something that should pass potentially an online filter, or is it something that needs to be flagged for review?
Hmm.
And so that was the gist of the first competition. And the second competition was they realized that those systems were biased against certain groups. So they saw that if you said um, I'm a black man versus I'm a white man, it would give you a different result, and that wasn't something that they wanted in their system. And
And
so
this
they,
was due to like some biases in the data sets itself, maybe.
yeah, yeah. So
Okay.
the way that it was labeled, or the way that those words are used in consistent contexts that are always negative, you can sort of skew just based off of the data that's given to you unintentionally. The algorithm might head in a certain direction that you don't want it to go. And so what Jigsaw did was they set out a metric that was intended to mitigate that. So we had to optimize not just for the area under the curve, but we also had to optimize for something they called BNSP and BPSN in order to try to make sure that it wasn't biased against certain subgroups.
Got it. And I think you tweeted out about this that your like I think your winning challenge, your winning solution was the starting point for this competition for many people. So, what were your first go-to steps when getting started on this competition?
We pretty much just took off back where we had finished. So I had a code base that was used on the previous competition. The first thing was just let's take that out again and see how it can do.
Mhm.
And at the beginning, it was good because it was a fairly complex solution. But very quickly, people were pulling out BERT and GPT-2 and XLNet and all of this state of the art stuff and just
And
immediately blew it out of the water.
these didn't exist back like during that time, right?
Yeah.
Most of these models.
Yeah.
Got it. And you mentioned these models. As per my knowledge, these are pretty compute heavy. So, what was your hardware setup like when working on this competition?
Um, so among our team, I have a 1080 Ti and a 1080 in a single system that I use quite a bit. But for
Mhm.
this challenge, it wasn't really all that useful because of those large models. The actually the 16 gigs of memory available on the P100s on the Kaggle kernels was
Right.
way faster than the 1080 Ti that I had. So I ended up using almost exclusively the Kaggle kernels. And then Jeff, he has a laptop that has a 1070 in it, and
Mhm.
for him it was the same thing. So we did almost all of our work on the Kaggle kernels. We did some experimentation on our local systems if we had all 4 available Kaggle kernels running, but
Okay.
it was minimal.
I think like like I always ask this question: is it possible to actually win or win a good medal in Kaggle using just kernels? And this wasn't a kernels only competition, so that's also an answer for the audience.
Yeah, yeah. Um, was talking to Jeff, there was a thread in the discussions of people asking if it was possible to get a gold exclusively with just the kernels, and we proved it. It's pretty difficult. They have everyone else who is using V100s and other resources had a clear advantage because there was even a tier of models beyond what we were using that we just kind of rolled out because they were so computer intensive.
The BERT large models and the other ones, right? So the bigger
Yeah,
end.
yeah.
Mhm.
There was BERT large and XLNet, and then GPT-2 medium,
Mhm.
and it was stuff that we knew would probably give us a boost, but we just looked at it and it was like, if this model's 3 times larger than the BERT small, and the BERT small already takes us 2 days to train, just
Right.
it would be so much work in order for us to get that BERT large all the way working.
Yeah. And I know like at least one in about 10-20 experiments works in data science, so to speak. So could you tell us like what ideas didn't work for you, and like what was your intuition behind those ideas when you actually tried those out, and maybe the reason for those not working?
We It's kind of funny. We had a meetup after the competition was over, and we discussed the various techniques because we had 2 teams from the meetup who were actually competing on this. Um,
Hmm.
and we probably spent the first hour discussing our actual solution and the last 3 hours explaining everything that didn't work,
Okay.
because we had so many different things that we tried that just ended up not leading anywhere.
Hmm.
Um, so I think a lot of things that people tried that didn't work. So we tried debiasing the word embeddings. So that's a technique where you've got these word embeddings that's supposed to be your understanding of what the words mean. Um,
Right.
and then you can, there's been a few different research papers that show that you can, in some way, debias them and remove some relationships that you don't want to be in there. Um,
Hmm.
but we tried that, and that didn't yield any improvement on the leaderboard. I think that I think it just depends on what you're optimizing for and what you're trying to remove, because you might be able to mathematically remove this is now no longer similar to this other word, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you've removed entirely any bias that might come along in that word embedding because they're such
Makes sense.
complex monsters. Um,
Hmm.
and then I could talk about this forever. The the other thing that we tried was we thought basically we could make our model sort of subgroup blind. And so the way we did that was just every time a subgroup word would occur, so whether it's black or white or Christian or homosexual or whatever, we could just always swap them with other subgroups words. And so in theory, it wouldn't be able to learn the bias because we would see those same words in all of the different contexts. Um,
Right.
and we tried that in a lot of different forms, but that ended up not working out. And I think that just having such a simple um, method of just swapping one single word probably isn't enough to remove that entire relationship with the word.
Right. Okay. And finally, I'd really love to know more about your solution. So if you could like enlighten us about your gold winning solution, and this must have involved some thought process behind like selecting the model. So if you could also talk about those.
Yeah, so there wasn't actually that much in terms of model selection because it was pretty much just as much as we could put out at the
Hmm.
time because we didn't have the resources to train more models and have more variety. Um,
Right.
but the summary of our overall model was we trained BERT on 4 different seeds. So we did a train test split, but we had 4 different seeds that we were working with. And we did that for BERT, for GPT-2, and then for the LSTMs that we were working with that were really similar from our previous competitions results.
Okay.
Um, and so we had 4 seeds and then the 3 different models, and then we just kind of did a big ensemble of those. So we ensemble within the seeds, we had 3 models, and we could use their sub validation set
Hmm.
and then figure out what the best combination per seed was. And then beyond
Right.
that, we could just average across the 4 seeds. And that was kind of the way our overall model worked. But I think the most unique thing about our solution was I figured out there was a way to sort of exploit the metric a little bit. And so the way the metric is laid out, you have you're graded across four things, and then they're power mean together. And so you have BPSN, BNSP, subgroup AUC, and overall AUC. And so
Okay.
overall AUC is just how accurate can you be in terms of classifying as toxic, non-toxic, and then subgroup AUC is how accurate are you on just that subgroup. So just the ones that were labeled as Christian or white or whatever else.
Mhm.
And then BPSN and BNSP are these metrics where you're trying to make sure that your model isn't skewed in some way. So your negative for the subgroup isn't somehow creeping up and passing the positive of the background. And what I
Right.
figured out we could do is make a prediction of what the identity was, and then we could shift that prediction by setting it to a different power. So we could learn that I'm trying to think of an example. I don't remember any of the numbers off the top of my head, but for example,
Mhm.
if you knew that your black category was always skewing high, it was biasing always towards toxic, then you can multiply it by the or put it to the 1.3 power, and that would skew that right side further to the left, and then it would overlap less with that background positive that you were trying to avoid. And so we
Great.
created this system that would,
I'm sorry. By towards the left, you mean towards less toxic, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And so I created a system that would just basically iterate through all of the subgroups and try to find which exponent would shift it to maximize the score. And what this would do is it would balance the BNSP and the BPSN so that they were closer together. And then that would in turn increase our score. So if you look
Okay.
at the rest of the people on the leaderboard above us, I think that almost every single one of them used the BERT large or the other large models. And I think that
Yeah,
that was the trick that allowed us to creep into that space without needing to do that.
that's interesting. I'd also like really love to know what would happen if you use those models along with this. So it might even like I guess shotgun you up to first or like top three positions maybe.
Yeah, yeah, it would be nice to be able to figure that out. I had some discussions with Jeff, and we think that it would, but
Hmm.
it's hard to say
So
without actually trying.
I know you spend a lot of time like discussing, having discussions after a competition ends also. So like, do you also iterate over like other possible solutions after it ends? And like, what's your thought process after a competition ends?
I don't really continue working on the competitions anymore. I typically just get too burnt out, and I'm just like, I'm never touching that again. But I go through and I read everyone's solution and I say, what did we miss?
Hmm.
I I try really hard to learn from those things every time because people have these fantastically complex things they've put together, and so I try to figure out what can I borrow and
Yeah.
what can I apply myself. Um,
Mhm.
after the results were in, Jeff asked me basically like, are you okay with this? Because I immediately was focusing so much on like what we could have done to get first, and he
Yeah.
was like, he was perceiving it as I wasn't happy that we got 12th, but
Hmm.
I was really happy that we got 12th, but I just am always obsessed about doing even better if I can.
Makes sense. That's the beauty of Kaggle, if I may call it that.
Yeah.
Also, if you could like tell a bit about what validation strategies did you set up here, and like how did you think about those when starting out, or like when did you start thinking about having a good CV in place?
We didn't really have to do anything particularly complex for this competition because we had 1.8 million samples. And so
Hmm.
what we ended up doing, we started with cross validation and we were doing K folds, and then we quickly realized that that was just way too much work, and you could get away with a train test split, and you wouldn't have to train on all of the folds, and it was much more efficient to do that. And we found that our local results were really, really well matched with the leaderboard. So all we
Right.
really did was train test split.
Got it. And I'm also curious, like many people tend to team up later in the competitions. However, you, I think, even for the earlier competition, formed a team right from the start. So, what was the reason behind doing that instead of like teaming up later?
There wasn't really any great reason behind that. Jeff and I just um, I saw him working on the previous competition, and I knew that he had a solid work ethic, and I knew I wanted him on my team. So we just teamed up pretty much immediately and said, the last competition didn't work out. Let's try to team up on this one and see if we can get even further. We had some people who approached us at the end and asked to team up,
Yeah.
and some of them were even above us, but I kind of shy away from doing that late in the competition because we've already built such complex systems
Yeah.
that um, when it is a kernels only inference thing, we need to in some way merge our two code bases, and that makes it significantly difficult. So we actually
Makes sense.
had people above us who wanted to team up, and we passed on that because we just didn't think it would be possible to combine our solution with other people's without just slowing down all other work.
And I'm also like curious to know like what was your experimental setup with your teammate, and like what how did you decide to take on the task or split those between yourselves?
We started really unstructured, and then we slowly learned our lesson because we had certain times where we would duplicate studies and stuff like that. And so what we ended up doing was just on GitHub, we would just have a bunch of different notebooks, and we would just do the classic thing of just adding another underscore and suffix of this is experiment two, this is experiment
Yeah.
two with whatever, and so on. But we started getting more organized. We had tables with all of our results in the GitHub, and then we also had a list of all of the things that we wanted to explore, and then eventually we would just tag our names on that and say, I'm working on this right now, so
Okay.
don't duplicate that.
Okay. And also, how would you like find these ideas that you wanted to work on through the discussions or maybe the kernels?
Some of it comes from the discussions, but a lot of it is kind of just brainstorming and looking at
Okay.
where our model's going wrong and trying to say, is there some way that we can um, remove this issue within our model? So we do a lot of error analysis, looking at, seems like we're really bad at the ones that are long, or we're really bad at the ones that um, have some specific vocabulary. And so we kind of just tackle that directly with error analysis.
Right.
And then the other thing is reading just piles and piles of papers. So just looking
Okay.
at, we found lots of things that were related to BERT, lots of things that were related to debiasing, and we just spent a lot of time kind of skimming those, finding what techniques seemed promising, and then eventually trying to apply them if they seemed like they might actually get us a boost in score.
Right. And usually, like this, I always find this pretty common that papers aren't that much extendable in code compared to the results that they claim. How was your experience when going through these?
Can you repeat that? I don't know if I totally caught that.
Sorry. So usually, like people mention that the results on papers aren't replicable. So, what was your experience when trying these papers out?
Yeah, that's definitely been my experience. I've probably I don't know how many things I've tried to pull out of papers only to have them not work at all. One of the more prominent ones is the concept net number batch embeddings, and these are some embeddings that are supposed to be state of the art in multiple different definitions, and they're supposed to be debiased and all of this magical stuff. But then when you actually try to apply them, they're very frequently not nearly as useful as just the stock ones.
Okay, got it. Um, uh, also would like to ask you, what are your best tips for a beginner who's just getting started and maybe dreams of getting a Kaggle Gold one day?
I think it's really just about getting in and starting and just continuing to it's just a fact that at the beginning you're probably not going to be very good, and then you'll pick up tricks across competitions, and then eventually you'll have a situation where you go, oh, this is exactly like XYZ competition that I did 4 months ago. Now I can apply that trick here, and it seems like everyone else has forgotten it already. So now you have a secret weapon. Um, but a lot of it, since I interact with a lot of people who are just new and starting off, the biggest thing that I see that holds people back is their attitude. Really, just being afraid that they're going to try something and it's not going to work, or they don't want to put in the time only for it to be not a useful endeavor. And I think that people just have to kind of accept that this is a bunch of experiments. A lot of things
Yeah,
aren't going to work, but when you find that thing that um, does really well and shoots you up the leaderboard, it's going to be really exciting and it's going to be worth it.
got it. You also mentioned the San Diego meetup in your post. So could you tell us about the group and what upcoming plans do you have for the meetup? I think you're organizing the meetup now.
Yeah. Now I'm one of the organizers. I do that with my co-organizer Chris, who just finished his PhD. Um,
Right.
and really, the group just gets together, and sometimes we have actually scheduled talks. So I've given one of those. I talked about the previous Jigsaw competition, and then
Mhm.
our main thing now is just getting together and working on the Kaggle competition. So we just have a weekly get together and we try to discuss relevant papers and we try to split off into teams and eventually compete. And so that's how that team with Jeff formed. And we also had another team that formed that also got a bronze medal. So that was good for them.
Yeah. I'll make sure to have it linked in the description for anyone who's from that area.
Yeah.
Before we conclude, could you give us a teaser? You mentioned you have big plans for the next year. So, what's in store for you? Or what are you
I
planning?
I can't share that much because the plans at this point are a little bit vague.
Okay.
But I can say that one of the things that I've been looking at a lot is satellite imagery.
Okay.
I think that that's a really interesting area because we can have basically a new picture of the entire Earth every day with this incredible resolution, and we can come with all kinds of conclusions with that. And I feel like it's kind of an underrated data source at this point. So
I
I
think Jeremy mentions that it's a fertile area for deep learning because it's sort of ready, but not many people are doing as many interesting things as it has a possibility for.
Yeah, yeah. So I can't really say. I'm looking at a specific use case that is very important for California specifically.
Okay.
But beyond that, I don't want to say anything until I have more concrete plans.
Got it. So really look forward to those. Before we end the call, could you tell what are the best platforms to follow you apart from Kaggle, Twitter, and LinkedIn? I'll have those linked off in the description.
Um, I think that's pretty much it. I'm pretty active on all of those. I'm also in a bunch of different Slack channels. And I'm always happy to help people if they have a problem, if they have some technical issue, if they're getting some error and they don't know what's going wrong. And I'm always willing to jump in and help them because I've been on the opposite end of that where um, I sit there for 6 hours and I go, why is this thing not working? And then it turns out, oh, I just had this thing. It was a list and it was supposed to be an array or something stupid like that. So I'm always willing to help with that stuff.
That's very kind of you. I'll maybe list down Kaggle News in the description. Any other Slack communities that you'd like to mention?
No, that's it. That's probably the main one.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me today and sharing your amazing solution. And good luck for the next three gold medals.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to give it a review or feel free to shoot me a message. You can find all of the social media links in the description. If you like the show, please subscribe and tune in each week to Chai Time Data Science.